How do you make a meaningful connection?
A connection is, and the best connections are where two independent become interdependent. When you have the collaboration or connection with a person, you're going to follow them wherever they may go.
Welcome to ReedFlections, a podcast on life, leadership, and learning. I'm your co-host, Art Calderon. I'm here with Reed Nyffeler. Reed is a CEO of a growing global security firm, a husband, a father, and recently a published author. You've been an author. You've been working on this book for some time, right? But this recently was released. It is Transform Through Purpose, Your Faith, Your Path to Living an Authentic and Intentional Life. Recently came out, pretty exciting. Make sure to look for a copy wherever you get your books. I know I have my own, signed. Now, here we are back at the podcast. We've been developing authentic and intentional leaders. We had several episodes that we talked all about that, about developing those leaders. We talked about who you should develop. Episodes 5, 6, 7, and 8, character, charisma, commitment, collaboration. Very clever. And now we're on here to episode 9, where we're building relational connections. Now, tell us, what role does connecting play in strong leadership?
Yeah, so I think connection is what is the most impactful for a legacy, right? Because if we talk collaboration, we can accomplish a lot. But really the connection is saying, I want to do that again, right? Sometimes the collaboration is around the purpose that we're trying to achieve.
Right.
Connection is on the person.
Ah.
And so if you have a person that is always accomplishing the purpose, you can be there. So how do we illustrate that? I think we can have a great collaborative leadership environment where we accomplish our goals and things go great, but that's just circumstantial, right? We could be at a particular organization or a time and place where we agree and align with that purpose, but we don't really collaborate with that other one. When you have the collaboration or connection with a person, you're going to follow them wherever they may go, right? And so, a great example of who are the people we're connected to. And I think as I was kind of mentally preparing for this particular episode, I thought, let's look at our highlights in life. Who are we connected to that we want to share those with? Maybe a wedding. There's people that are from all sorts of different stages in our life. We would invite to a wedding because we have a connection.
Mm-hmm.
We may have collaborated with them in life, right? Family. We may have collaborated with them in business. We invite, coworkers or peers in a business environment. We may have collaborated with them in college. Where they were at a season in life. We may have collaborated with them in just our other extracurricular settings that they were connecting, right? Or a graduation, or a big notable event. Who do we want to talk to or call? And that's because of their connection with us, right? They care about us beyond the task.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is what establishes a legacy. So we will follow that leader again on another purpose. Not because they were just a great collaborative leader, but because we had a connection, because we want a collaborative leader to help us accomplish a purpose we care about, but we'll follow that collaborative leader when we're able to connect to them on another purpose that may have not have been as a priority of a purpose as the previous one. So it's huge in legacy is where the connection comes in.
Okay. So that begs the question, how do you make a meaningful connection? You got 100 people pulling at you 100 different ways all the time. And so how do you make sure that you make those connections?
Well, I think you don't miss a moment, right? I think ultimately as humans, we're not when we boil it all down, we're not about tasks, right? We do tasks, but that's not who we are. We want credit for completing a task maybe, but that's not inherently who we are, right? We're not going to say at the end of life saying, you know what, this was someone that was great at these particular tasks. Right? When you give a eulogy, you're saying, hey, this is the type of person they were, right? And so those type of people or meaningful events, if we look back into our particular lives, we could probably highlight or what come to mind 10 events in life. And they inherently are building who we are as a person. And so what we want to do in order to connect to people is recognize these are turning point events in people's lives, right? And so sometimes there are decisions we have to make, right? Where to go to college or whom to marry or what job to take. right? And so we don't want to miss that moment. Sometimes there are things that were outside of our control, right? Whether that's an unfortunate accident in life or something that happened. Well, as a connected leader, we show empathy and we're there for those moments, right? We're there to be a sounding board when they make a decision. We're there to help frame their thoughts, etc. And we're there to remember meaningful events in life that ultimately are the way that we demonstrate our connection to that individual.
Every connection that you make, they can't be your best friend. You can't go
Mhm.
to lunch with every single person. But there are some connections that you want to make the most of. How do you make the most out of potential connections? How do you make sure you prioritize, or what do you do with that?
Yeah, and I think the thing with connections is it doesn't always have to be a lifelong connection,
Sure.
right? And so some of it is how do we get the benefit of the best of both of us at this particular time? And as again, we reflect upon life. I remember in college, I had some very close friends in college. We were all at a similar stage in life. We all had similar interests, and we really, as iron sharpens iron, we really spurred each other on. However, as time passes, you graduate, and we went different directions, ended up in different states, in different places, et cetera, et cetera. And our professional choices, I remember one that I had a strong connection with. He became a weatherman. And so, we've maybe lost touch over time, but apart from living in weather, I don't really have the level of interest that he had in the weather. And so it was a great connection. We had great friendship. We enjoyed what we were doing, but we went different directions. So that was a season in life. At the same time as I met my wife while I was had just started college. And so that is a connection that I've had throughout many seasons of life, from marriage to children and otherwise. And so we can see between those two extremes how connections have different duration. And so we don't need to always look for lifelong friends because we're missing valuable connections at a season in life. Conversely, we should be able to have people that are in our lives over a season. A connection is, and the best connections are where two independent become interdependent. That means that they're not overly dependent on someone else and that person pulls away and they fall. That's saying that we're enriched by that relationship so that we can go back to our independence to be interdependent again in a stronger position. And so those are the ways that we can build these meaningful connections
Uh-huh.
of interdependency that we both benefit from and are enriched by. And as they, ebb and flow in our lives, we're thankful for them, but we're
Yeah.
also able to appropriately, move on to the next interconnected relationship.
I remember my fifth grade year.
Mm.
Toughest 3 years of my life.
I
But
believe you.
no. Fifth grade year, and I had a teacher named Mrs. Beamer. Mrs. Beamer. Now, this is in the 70s, Reads, back in the old days. And I was just a kid.
1870s or 1970s, just to
Yeah,
clarify for the
no, it
audience.
was 1970s,
Oh,
right?
okay.
And I remember it was tough because with my dad's job, we moved around quite a bit, and I was often the new kid in a school, a new kid in a neighborhood, and in this particular school, I did have some struggles fitting in, and there were some. Altercations with some of the kids, and actually, I felt even as a young kid, I felt some of the staff didn't care for me. You can feel that as a child. Except in Mrs. Beamer's class. Mrs. Beamer, fifth grade class, she was a loving person. She was kind. I felt recognized. I felt valued there. And here it is, many years later, and I remember that as an adult. And I remember to what I learned was I need to be that person now. I need to make people feel valued. I may only spend a short time with them. There might be in passing, but if I can help them feel valued, feel the love of that maybe they don't get anywhere else, that could affect someone for the rest of their lives. So, Mrs. Beamer, from Woodrow Elementary School, Modesto, California, if you're still out there, God bless you. You're 117 years old, but you did a great job. I appreciate you.
Well, I think that also illustrates the point why connection is the fifth one. Because ultimately at the beginning, she had a character, right? She was a character that drew you in as your fifth grade teacher.
Right.
I presume she had charisma,
Yes.
right? And she was ready and willing and able to, interact and have charisma that kept and captured your attention. And then ultimately she made a connection,
Mhm.
right? As a result of those two things. But that was after she had character and then she had charisma, then she was committed to the classroom,
Right.
and then finally she collaborated and led to the connection. Because if you don't do those things in those order, the connection has no value. What do you attach that to, right? If you don't have somebody that has character, what are you attaching that connection to, right? And so if we try to connect to people and then we connect to the wrong people, we're going to be drawn to the wrong characters. So we got to assess that first. And then ultimately, if they're not committed to a purpose or cause, what's the value of the connection? Where are we going? What are we going to be doing with this? And they don't collaborate, we're not going to draw other people into that connection. And so that's why it's fifth too, is you can see that as a result. And then at the same time this illustrates the point as well. In that story with Mrs. Beamer, she didn't miss a moment. She saw that there was a time where you needed a connection, right? You were in a classroom that you didn't feel all that comfortable in. And she, as a teacher, had intuition to recognize art needs connection here. And through that compounding effect of those 5 C's, in that 5th C, she connected to you, that now has that a lasting effect, that 100 some odd years later, you're remembering that.
That's right.
You're remembering the connection someone else made, and it made a difference, right? It's a transformational moment in your life that is now transforming other people's lives as a result of you living into that.
So you met a lot of people in your line of work, in your career, and since you launched Signal, talk about one of those people that you met, one of those connections that you met that was meaningful to you, even to this day. Maybe you don't necessarily have connection with them still, but maybe you do. But talk about a time when you had a meaningful connection with somebody and how that influenced you and your trajectory.
There's literally been countless examples as I look back. I mean, I think, any leader will tell you they can't be in that position that they're in of any level of success without a ton of connections. And so, that's very difficult to select one. However, I think what is best for the analogy here is to select an obscure one that many may not even think of or see right now, but have led to a multiplication effect. And so I remember a very early franchisee, and he was actually franchise number 6, and it was in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And, at the time, we were building our organization on police and military. And so this was really the first police individual. And this particular person was a government contractor overseas and wanted to come back to the United States. And he had been a Hawaii police officer and then went overseas to be a government contractor, and then was in a bunker with another 40 or 50, even 150 people. And he was a connector. I mean, he got to know everybody, knew their name and everything else, and a little bit of a personality, as many of our franchisees are. And so he was, known for being a bit of personality. And so I remember then he bought a franchise, and it was a huge risk, franchise number 6. So this was very, very early on. And he said, hey, if I'm successful, I will talk to all these other franchisees that are here and that are potential franchisees, right? That are here, that are looking to get back, right? We're overseas in the middle of the desert, and we don't want to be there, and that contract's going to end. But we're not risk takers, right? We're risk averse. We've led our entire lives as police and military in a risk averse way. And so he launched his franchise. I remember going there, and this is in Hampton Roads area. And I was like, wow, this is a little bit different. There's a lot of waterways in there. And so patrols were, more far reaching. It's a big military installment, because it's on the water. So you get the Navy and all the different military bases. And so he said, if we're able to get a couple of contracts, it'll be key. And I said, okay, this is a meaningful connection that's there. And so he said, if I can get this particular client, and they said, if I can get this client that has patrols, which is a principal element of our business, then I'll be able to build our business, and I will go tell every other person that this is a success. Okay. I said, okay, now I see the path towards success, right? So literally I flew up there, and I was launching him as a franchisee. I go knock on the guy's door, and he was a ghost. I mean, he was hard to get a hold of, right? And that's natural, right? I mean, I'm not easy to get a hold of by design, right? I don't, need to have my day inundated with prospective salespeople knocking on my door. And so I said, okay, can I have the guy's card? I walked in, grabbed the guy's card, took it off his desk or from the assistant, and they gave me the number. And so I called this individual every week. And I believe it was 30 weeks because I kept notes, and I called him for 30 straight weeks, and I left a message. And I would call him sometimes twice a week. So it was probably 40 plus calls. And I would leave a message every time. Hey, I'll call you next week. Clearly Tuesday at 10 o'clock doesn't work. I'll call you Wednesday at 1 p.m. And so after about 40 calls, he called back and he said, I have to talk to the guy that's left me 40 messages. Wow. I said, oh, thank you. That became a meaningful connection. And he said, now, what are you trying to get a hold of me for? And I said, well, I want to sell. I think, we can provide a better service for you at a lower cost. And so he said, okay, I'll take a meeting with you. And so I flew up there. with his franchisee. We had a meeting in their boardroom. I'll never forget it. And we were talking through the needs. And ultimately, in the end, he ended up signing as a client and an early client. And so then within about 6 or 12 months, had an annual convention. This particular individual, this client, came and spoke at our convention on persistence and resultance. That became a meaningful
Did he
connection.
talk about?
Yeah, he's like, I've never
process?
had a guy that was there. Essentially, Reed was inclined upon getting it, and we've got great service as a result. However, the connection was that individual that connected me back to the franchise owner. So that franchise owner, needless to say, was ecstatic because he saw the opportunity. It began to build his economics. And to his word, I had 25 other franchisees sign directly from that particular franchisee.
Some of them are still with us.
Some of them still with us 15 years later.
Yeah.
And that created a ripple effect of the others that were in that similar contracting that saw success of this one individual. And so it was a meaningful moment. It hung in the balance. And going back to the story of that franchisee is I remember how all encompassing that was. And so he hopped in the car, drove the 45 minutes to meet his mom so I could tell his mom about his business and how great it was. And her son made the right decision, et cetera, et cetera. So that connection was not just for a business purpose. That connection was his significant relationship. It was his family that was there. And ultimately, it was his peers. And so that connection was not just an event. And it was looking at that holistic connection that happened in that moment. And I saw through a purpose he was trying to achieve and went through that. And that had the ripple effect that we were looking for over time from a client standpoint, which is still those contracts have carried forward to other franchise owners since. And then now, obviously, we have multiple franchise owners that came as a direct result of that connection.
Wow, that's a great story. Now, you've talked about character, charisma, commitment, collaboration, and connection, right? Those things. Bring them all together. How do they all mesh?
Yeah. And so again, if you want to be a leader that truly develops other leaders, you have to really work on all five. I think sometimes we're going to focus on one and we're going to be like, if I'm really strong here, I'll be able to draw people in. Well, you're actually hurting your long-term effects of leadership. And so you must work on all five. And I believe they should be done in order, as I kind of mentioned earlier. The first is your character. Don't even worry about collaboration. Don't worry about connection if you don't have character, right? Because you're ultimately connecting people to something that's not sustainable. It'll fall apart and you're going to be burning people, right? Some people have great connection, but they don't have character. Essentially, they're charlatans, right? They're using that to manipulate people short term. And as soon as people realize they're doing so without character, they're going to leave you anyways. And so the first then is character. And then the second is now that you have a character, use charisma to connect and keep their attention, right? And so you're going to bring their attention in through that charisma. And you're saying, okay, how do I engage people? Some people have high character, but they don't put themselves out there to have a conversation, right? And as they have conversation, you're like, wow, I really like this person. And that's where the charisma comes in.
Right.
And then see commitment, right? Because ultimately the relationships as a leader that last are not fly by night or immediate, right? We could have a character and we could have charisma and we meet this person on the plane and it's just a short-term conversation, right? We're just flying and we had a good conversation and we move on. But that commitment to the cause and that person and the outcome through life's ups and downs are what lead to the ultimate next step. Then we begin to make progress through collaboration, right? And so if we have character, which draws us to others and maintains a connection. We have charisma, which allows for us to have that initial meeting and build on top of that. Then we have commitment towards a cause or purpose. Then we see collaboration where we bring others in to help us achieve that purpose. And ultimately, as we subdivide responsibilities, as we talked about on the last episode, that makes sure that that collaboration will be effective. Then finally, we have connection. We connect with them inherently as humans. Right now, if we have connection on the front end, which can happen, we will have too many relationships that don't really lead any progress. I remember one of my early bosses at my first professional job out of college. He was a great connector. And he's kept connection with me now 25, 30 years later.
Oh, wow.
He'll reach out to me periodically. And one thing that he always tried to do was connect around something. And so we live in Omaha and he loves college baseball still. And so one of the first things like, hey, I should always come into College World Series and my team's there and, blah, blah, blah. Do you mind picking me up a t-shirt from the College World Series? And so I did that for 5 or 7 years. I'm like, no. Nah. And it was always going back to those connections to see what was available. And that's when then he began to reach out to me as I began to build an organization to stay connected within the tight parameters of what he was looking for. So you see that connection without the collaboration, right? He wasn't looking to collaborate. He was looking to keep connected.
Mm-hmm.
Then you see that connection without commitment. And so that's where it didn't work. Whereas if we build this the right way, we start with character, right? Then we have charisma that can engage and keep our attention and build the conversation. And then ultimately over time, we see commitment in the same direction, right? And then we begin to draw people in to collaborate. And that is where we make meaningful, long lasting, multiple valuable connections over time. And that's, I think, as those 5 things come together, it must be in that order as well.
Very good. Thank you very much. Well, we have come to the end of our time together. Here we are, episode 9, Connected. Finished up, wrapped up. Thank you very much, Reed. Appreciate your insight. Thank you, listeners, for joining us. We've talked about why you should develop leaders, who you should develop. Next, episodes 10 through 14, what should leaders be able to do? What should they be able to do? And episode 10 coming up, visioning. Like that. Leveraging informed decision-making to picture and create a positive future. I like that.
Now for the last word. If you're a leader, connections enrich your life. Recognize that over the duration of your life, you will reflect back and you will see those meaningful connections. No one will come up and say, what did you do? They'll say, who did you work with and how were those relationships impacting your life? So there's a power in connection. But connect on purpose with a purpose, because those become the most meaningful. If you're connecting for the sake of manipulation or you're connecting for short-term results, you're missing a huge opportunity to enrich your life. Look into your life and say, who shall I connect with that is aligned in my character, that has charisma, that we can have an ongoing carry forward that conversation, that is committed to the same purpose and cause that I am, that ultimately collaborates well with me and others. Those are the meaningful connections. Do an inventory of your life and say, who are those people that fill those 5 C's that I want to connect with, and reach out to them today.